Hello everyone and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial we're going to be learning about the inbuilt method getElementsByClassName. So we're going to learn how we can query elements from the document object model using this method getElementsByClassName. So what I've done is I've created a fictional scenario for us. We work for a North American airline. We fly to and from cities in Canada, the United States of America, and Mexico. But here's the problem. There is a massive snowstorm that hits all of Canada. It does not affect New York for some reason, even though that's very close to Toronto. And what happens is our boss gets a phone call from the CEO. They want to make all of the Canadian cities the text color to be in red, and they want to make it bigger because we're basically working for this airline and we're going to be like, hey, look at our awesome deals and make the cities really big to make sure that people are spending money because the airline is losing money. No one wants to travel because of the storm. So what we're going to do is we're going to use getElementsByClassName to affect only the Canadian cities. So Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, and Calgary. So what I've done in my index.html document, I've provided a class to all of the Canadian cities called Canadian City. So this paragraph with Toronto has the class of Canadian City, as do these three here. So let's go and basically write up the code. So the first thing I want to do is I just want to create a variable. I'm going to say let Canadian cities be equal to, and I'm going to say document dot get elements by class name. We have our parentheses because this is a method, and what we need to do is we need to just pass in the class that we're looking to basically get from the document object model. So if we just paste it in there, we now have our Canadian cities. So what I want to do is I just want to log out the Canadian cities so you can see it. So console.log Canadian cities. And if I save and refresh, and we see here, we actually get a HTML collection, okay? So right now we don't actually see, Toronto and Vancouver and Calgary and Montreal, okay? So HTML collection is a data type we haven't covered in this course, but here's the really cool thing. You can actually change a HTML collection into an array. So let me just basically comment that guy out. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to basically say that Canadian cities, so I'm overriding the value now of Canadian cities, is equal to, and I'm going to say array dot from. This is an inbuilt method in JavaScript whereby what I can do is I can pass in the Canadian cities. So what I'm doing in the first line of our code is I'm using getElementsByClassName, this inbuilt method. I'm saying document dot getElementsByClassName, passing in the class Canadian City that we have in our index.html file. I'm storing it in the variable called Canadian Cities. But then what I'm doing here is I'm converting the Canadian cities, this HTML collection, into an array. Okay, so what we're doing here is we are getting or grabbing the Canadian cities from the document object model. Okay, and then here what I'm doing is I am converting the HTML collection into an array. And the reason that is useful is we've worked with arrays before and we know how to iterate over the values of an array. So now if I log out Canadian cities, we should see an array, and that is what we get. We get an array. We see here it is an array and we have our Canadian cities there. Okay, that's awesome. So now what I want to do, now that we've converted that to be an array, and you can also check to see if something is an array, by the way. What you do is you say array dot is array and pass in whatever it is you're looking for. So what we'll do is we will actually just log that out to the console. So we'll say console.log, and we're going to pass in this array dot is array, and this should give us a true or false value. Let me just save and refresh, and we get true. Okay, awesome. So we've converted the HTML collection into an array, and we've just double checked to make sure that it actually is an array. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to hook up the button, so when the user clicks on the button, we just log out something to the console, and then once we've done that, instead of just logging something out of the console, what we'll do is we will actually iterate over the elements of the array and change the styling. So the key point about this tutorial is that you can also query the document object model using .getElementsByClassName or getElementsByClassName. So what we can do is we can just say let button be equal to, and we'll use a query selector. So we'll say document.query selector, parentheses, because it's a method, and it is expecting to receive an argument. So we're just going to type in button here. So what we're doing is we're just grabbing the button on the HTML page. There's only one button there, and we're storing it in a button variable. Awesome. Now what I want to do is on the button, let's just put the on click, and what we'll do is we will assign that the value of a function. So you can do a function like so, or you can do an arrow function, it's up to you. If you want to do an arrow function, just delete the function keyword, have your little equal sign and chevron, and then we've got our little arrow there. So now what we have is a button waiting for a user to click it, and if the user clicks on it, we'll just console.logout clicked, semicolon to end the statement there. So let me save and refresh, and if I click here, we get clicked. Awesome. Okay, so now our button is hooked up. We've grabbed the Canadian cities from the document object model and we've converted them into an array. So now what I want to do is I want to iterate over each element of the array. So there's two ways we can do this. We can write, well there's a lot of ways to do this, but in this course what we've covered is you could do a for loop or you could do a for each, okay? Why don't we do a for loop just for practice? So we'll say for, I want to start counting where our counter variable I is equal to 0, because we know previously that arrays start counting at 0. So we'll say let I be equal to 0. We're going to run while I is less than the Canadian cities dot length. And after each iteration, each time we cycle through the array, we just want to increment our counter variable. And what we'll do is, just to start off, let's just log out all of our Canadian cities to the console. So we'll say console.log Canadian cities, and we want to log out each city depending on whatever index we're on. So the first time we enter the for loop, I has a value of 0. So the first Canadian city will be Toronto. Then what we do is after we log out Toronto, we come up here to the final expression in the for loop, increment our counter variable, I has a value of 1. So the second element in that array is Montreal. Toronto is at index 0, Montreal is at index 1. So then we log out Montreal. Then we increment our counter variable again, we log out Vancouver, and then we increment our counter variable again, we log out Calgary, and then basically what happens is, because the array length is 4, finally we then check and we say, okay, is 4 less than 4? No, it's not, so we don't run the loop anymore. So now, if I save and refresh, we should see all of our Canadian cities logged out to the console. Oh, we have to press the button, apologies. So we click the button there, and we get our various Canadian cities. So that's awesome, but we don't want to log the Canadian cities out to the console. If we say that to our boss, he'll be, he or she will be like, well, that's great, but have you done what I asked? Have you changed the font to be red? So we want to keep our job working for this fictional airline. So now what I want to do is, instead of just logging out the Canadian city at index I want to maybe change the color. But first of all, if we're going to be doing a few things, I don't want to keep saying, Canadian cities.style, .color, Canadian cities.style, .font size, etc. Let's just create a city variable. We'll say let city be equal to Canadian cities at index of I. And now what we can do is, instead of saying Canadian cities.style, color is equal to red, all we need to do is just say city.style. Visual Studio Code is just being bold here. So city.style.color is equal to, and we'll change that to be red. And what we'll also do is we will change the city.style.font size to be equal to, we'll say 25 pixels, okay? So now if I save and refresh, when I press the button, hopefully the Canadian cities will go red and the font size will change. And we do, and that's awesome. And our boss is happy. We've just passed probation in our web development job. Okay, so guys, that's awesome. Key takeaway about this tutorial is another way to query the DOM is you can actually use getElementsByClassName. Obviously it's a method, so we have our parentheses at the end, and just pass in whatever class you're looking for. In this case, the Canadian cities had a class of Canadian city, and we also saw in this tutorial that we can use the array with a capital letter dot from, and inside of parentheses pass in this case a HTML collection, and convert it to an array. So Canadian cities is now actually an array. On our button, and remember our button, we just said document.querySelector button. There's only one button here in our HTML file, so that is a reference to that button. And when the user clicks on it, we added the dot on click there. We run this arrow function. The arrow function has no name, but when the user clicks on the button, we run the code in between the opening and closing curly brace. And really what it is it's just a for loop iterating over each element of the array, in this case Canadian cities, so Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary. And what we do is we just, whatever city we're on, we store it in the city variable just to make the text a bit more concise, shorter hand syntax. And then what we do is you just say city.style.color is equal to red, and then city.style.font size is equal to 25 pixels. Okay, that's awesome. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next tutorial where we will continue working with the document object model.